Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim Maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Sirata al-latina an'amta alayhim ghayril maghdubi alayhim wala dallin. Bismillah. Last night I was sleeping and dreaming, and I dreamt of this ceremony today. And in the dream I was kind of talking, but I was going all around, all over the place in the talk, and I was looking for a track, as you do when you talk in a way that hasn't been prepared. You, and Sheikh Nazim was very good at this, you would look to pick up a track, some inspiration, and then follow the track once it comes. But at first you're kind of like in the woods, wandering. And the track that came up was, and then I said, okay, that's what it's all about. No one will be surprised. The track was dhikr. Why dhikr? Because everything in our religion and in our tradition is about dhikr, in the sense of remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and the Quran itself has been referred to as a dhikr also. It's a way of remembering Allah. So, marriage is also all about Allah. It's not about us. It's not about the individuals, it's about our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the Catholics before us, or actually, yes, before us, they knew about this as well, and many times you would hear in the church that in marriage, God was the third person. And this is correct. This is theologically, ontologically correct, that Allah is the presence that we all refer to. And also why we call our meetings now Wisal, connecting with the presence of Allah. In 1980, I was still a bachelor. This is how it all started. My interest in marriage, I've wanted to do this for a long time, to marry people. And my interest in marriage actually started in a very unique way. I was still a bachelor, 30 odd years old, and I was already a Muslim, but not sure whether I needed or wanted to get married. I knew what haram was, but I didn't know much about marriage, and I was brought to Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, there was a Sufi saint named Bawa Muhayyiddin, who's now deceased, and people told me I had to go see him. And I came into his congregation, to his meeting place, and it wasn't long. I hadn't even expressed the idea that I didn't know what to do about marriage, and someone had told him my name, and he looked at me with these very piercing eyes, with these laser beam eyes, and said, "My son Ibrahim." This was a long time ago, not too many people refer to me as my son anymore. They'd be too old. So he said, "My son Ibrahim," he looked me straight in the eyes and he said, "and marriage is from the order of Allah." He said it like that. And it went right into my heart, and it shook me. In fact, the energy was so strong from that hal that for 2 days after, I was walking around like a zombie, not knowing what to do, not able to make a cup of tea, not able to think straight, and I got scared. So I went back to the Zawiya and said, "Bawa, what you said to it's too strong." He started laughing and laughing. He said, "It's okay, my son. When you get married, this energy will all ground itself. Everything will be okay." Which got me even more scared. I'm going to have to wait to get married. I can't even walk down the street in this state. But as soon as he said it, boom, I was back on earth. Okay, this was a very special man, but he got me started on the idea and the necessity of marriage. So marriage is from the order of Allah. Now, people in this society don't understand this anymore. They think it's okay to go out, to date, to cohabit, to shack up, to live together. All these, they think all of these things are okay, but this is not what any of the religions teach us. Okay? So, and certainly not what Islam teaches us. So when we go back to the teachings of Islam, Lois kindly recited for us some ayats of the Quran, but the one that always caught me, that I thought was most essential, and I'll ask for your indulgence with my poor Arabic, but I am going to try to say it first in Arabic, translate it, and then explain it. Huwa alladhi halakakum min nafsin wahidatin wajala minha zawjaha liyaskun ilayha, which Yusuf Ali translates, it is he who created you from a single person, a single nafs, and made his mate of like nature in order that he might dwell with her. Now, this could be interpreted almost in the Western idea of twin souls, or soulmates, or âme sœur in French. But that is a discussion for another time. We'll come there. But what I wanted to, I think the key to this entire ayat is the word yaskun. I'll spare you writing it on the board. Yaskun, sin, kaf, nun. And if you look up the meaning of yaskun, it says to be still, to be tranquil, to be peaceful, to be in repose, to be in rest. I.e., the intention of Allah in people getting married is that they find repose, that they find rest, that they find comfort. Now, in modern society, we see more of the contrary, actually, than this, for many reasons that will have to be a subject of another talk. But in modern society, we see a lot of conflict, we see a lot of competition, we see a lot of aggression, we see a lot of disharmony, for many, many reasons, most of which are social, some are ideological, some may even be theological. But the intention of marriage is to find repose. And occasionally, we can find examples of it. They aren't that common now, from my experience. Maybe in other societies they are. But occasionally we find examples of it. And we can even find examples in non-Muslims. Just recently, for those who are following the news, they noticed that Nancy Reagan died. And the Reagans, for whatever one might think about them politically, seemed to have a very solid marriage right to the end. They accompanied each other. She had to accompany him through Alzheimer's, and then afterwards, when he died, she got eventually sick and died at the age of 94. But they seemed to have an exemplary relationship. Actually, George Bush also, there's a whole other political take, but the right-wingers seem to have better marriages than the left-wingers like Clinton and Kennedy and those people. But that's a whole other story. So there is that possibility and that desire and that wish to arrive at a situation where two people live in harmony and support each other. Not always, it's never perfect harmony, but overall harmony as opposed to overall conflict that one sees all around. Okay, so that's the number one point. We're looking to live in peace, and that doesn't mean not having differences of opinion or exchanges or even arguments from time to time. We'll talk about that later. So what are the elements of an Islamic marriage, according to even the fiqh? Okay, we're going to look at those briefly. The first one is that, and we'll do this shortly, is that the contract is spoken, that both people, the bride and the groom, have to accept willingly that they are being married. Now, as many of you know, this is not always the case in some Muslim countries where marriages are imposed on people. And this is actually not right. This is neither from the Sunnah nor from the Quran. These are social customs that predate Islam, that are part of the Jahiliyyah tradition, if you want, the tradition of ignorance. But there are still, and I get people trying to consult me, there are still people whose families impose on them what they don't wish themselves. And this is not right. So that's the spoken contract. And the spoken contract implies free will. The bride and the groom both willingly agree to technology, to the contract. The second principle of Islamic marriage is the wali and the wakil, mostly intended for the woman. The woman should have a guardian, and she should have an agent. She should have people around to protect her. Okay? And our society is very deficient in terms of protecting women. They complain, and rightfully so, that in Saudi Arabia the woman can't drive or she can't move around without a member of her family following her or accompanying her, but which is wrong. But there's some truth and some wisdom in that. And here, on the other hand, we have women going around completely unprotected. So again, for those following the news, if you watch, there's a huge issue on American college campuses. Okay, now they call it the rape culture. But if you look carefully, it isn't really a rape culture. It's a lack of protection culture. It's a promiscuity culture. So a young lady in her late teens or early 20s gets drunk with a guy in his early 20s, late teens, and they go into a place in seclusion, and they're both drunk out of their minds, and surprise, something happens. Okay, and they call this a rape culture. This is a lack of protection culture. Females in this society do not have adequate protection. Now we have to be careful, and the liberal people will criticize some of the Muslim nations. Protection can go too far, as many have experienced. If you have a protector who's too controlling and too micromanaging, he makes your life a prison. Okay? That's not what we mean by protection. Okay? And there are husbands and fathers and families who do this to their daughters. They're so protective that their daughters can't do anything. They have to stay at home, like maybe in Afghanistan and some of the cases with the Taliban, and the girls have to stay at home. They can't even be educated because they're protecting them so much. So, like in everything else, we need balance. Okay? So that's the principle of the wali. And that could be the subject of a whole talk on its own. And then there's the mahar. The mahar is a dowry. People in modern society consider the dowry something very ancient and very archaic, but actually it has an important function. Because people who are critical of it will say, oh, you're just buying the woman as if she were a material object. You're objectifying women. And that's the critical dimension, critical aspect that liberals might look at. But we look at it a different way. We look at the dowry as a sign that the man and his family give worth, value to the woman. And this value is signified by a certain amount of money, like a lot of value in our society is signified. It also has the practical possibility of giving the woman a certain material security. That's the way it was intended originally. So if the husband dies, or if there's a divorce, or so the woman still has the wherewithal to continue her life without falling immediately into poverty. So the dowry is another part, an integral part of the Islamic marriage. Okay, one of the things I wanted to address also in the integrals is kafa'a. The Arabic people know about kafa'a. And the modern Arab societies, I believe, have a completely wrong idea of what kafa'a is. Modern Muslim society. Kafa'a means suitability. Okay? The bride and the groom should be suitable for each other. almost 99% of the situations I hear in my office, the family thinks suitability is about professional status and money. Period. So I have young Arab and Pakistani Muslim ladies coming in, and their families absolutely want them to marry this guy because he's an engineer, that guy because he's a doctor, the other one because the family has money. And this is only the most this is the Donald Trump aspect of kafah, the most superficial aspect. This is not the deep kafah. The deep suitability is that the people, the bride and groom, are suited to each other, are appropriate to each other, will be helpful to each other, will understand each other. It's really a kafa'ah, an intellectual, emotional, spiritual kafa'ah, not what most of the modern societies look at in terms of money and profession. When I was in Jordan, I was living in an apartment upstairs of a family, the three daughters in their 30s. None of them were married, and they were intelligent, good-looking women. None of them were married. Why? Their father was insisting on a dowry of an apartment, 25,000 American dollars, and having a good professional job. And those opportunities were not there in Jordan for people to have that kind of money or have those kind of resources. This is not the sunnah of our Prophet. So anyone who studied the Sirah knows there were marriages going on with the Sahaba, even with the Prophet, where the mahar might have been, or the dinner gathering was a liter of milk. And the dowries were small, because very small, that's what people could afford. If they had 1,000 camels, the dowry might be 100 camels. But if they had nothing, and they were living from hand to mouth, as we say, then the dowries would be appropriately small. The important thing is for people to be married and to be in peace in their marriage. Shifting from the Islamic perspective to the Western perspective, in the future, if we do marriages, I'm going to present everyone with this book. This is a Western book by a scholar called psychologist John Gottman. It's called The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. This man studied couples in closed environments for 30 years, videotaping them, audio taping them, interviewing, and trying to see what works and what doesn't in marriage. I called it to one of the Islamic scholars I wrote to, the operationalization of the Sunnah. It comes to the same conclusions as the Prophet, that through modern sociological, psychological research. Now, of course, we don't have time to go into the conclusions, but I just wanted to underline 2 aspects. Okay? In Islam, we say, La ilaha illallah. We start with the negative, and then we go to the positive. The negative is what destroys marriage. And he calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The 4 things that destroy marriage most. First, criticism. Not of a person's behavior, but of the person themselves. What can also be called character assassination. Okay, overly critical about the nature of the person instead of the nature of some piece of behavior that you don't like. The second, which is the most toxic, he says, is contempt. Mépris en français. Contempt can take many forms: name-calling, eye-rolling, mockery, hostile humor. In whatever form, contempt, mépris, is the worst of the 4 horsemen. By consequence, respect is the most important. Third is defensiveness, not being able to listen to the other person and blaming them immediately, and stonewalling, which is an extreme of defensiveness. Okay, we can talk more about this personally, but people have to know that these are the ways that, so he gives an example of stonewalling. For example, a husband comes home from work, his wife starts criticizing him, the less he responds, the more she yells. Eventually he gets up and leaves the room, and by turning away from her and avoiding a fight, he is also avoiding the marriage. Okay, this is stonewalling. The husband who comes home from work, his wife is upset because he's late, he hasn't done what he said he was going to do, and he just sits behind his newspaper and doesn't answer. Okay? So those are the 4 destructive aspects of marriage, in marriage. Okay? That's criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And he goes into this in great detail. Okay? On the positive side, he talks about, and this every couple should know. Okay, on the positive side, he talks about the magic 5 hours. In other words, 5 hours that every couple should spend with each other. Okay, and this is the way it goes on a weekly basis. 2 minutes a day, he said, before you leave for work, every day, to just say what you're going to be doing that day, what some events may be occurring. That's number 1, okay, when you leave. When you come back, debriefing. Oh, my boss was really terrible today. He didn't give me a moment's peace. He was always criticizing me. You know, says the wife, and the husband said, oh, we were completely stressed out. I had to work outside. It was freezing, whatever. Debriefing at the end of the day. That should take 20 minutes. Expressing admiration and appreciation for the other. I really liked your meal. I really liked the way you're dressed today. You were really nice with that woman that was in trouble. Whatever, expressing appreciation. 5 minutes a day. Expressing affection to each other, holding, kissing, hugging, whatever. 5 minutes a day. And then the one that people often forget is having a weekly date. Saptsi, very hard to do at the beginning when you have young children, but still important. According to Gottman, you should take out 1 evening a week, even when you have young children. Get the grandparents in or the aunts in to babysit and go out of the family and be together once a week for 2-3 hours. It doesn't have to be anything particular. Have a cup of coffee, have dinner, go to a movie, whatever. Altogether, you put all that together, it comes to 5 hours. Okay, and he said these are the 5 magic hours. Now, obviously this is not so simple. Situations present themselves with all kinds of complexity and difficulty. So one can consult. In the traditional Islamic context, people consulted with their parents and their families. My experience is that generally they're not very helpful. Most of the parents of the Muslim children I see are lacking in wisdom, they're lacking in understanding of the society we live in, so they're not very helpful. Some go to the imams, and one day I was in the ICQ, and there was a Tunisian lady with her daughter, and I said, what are you doing here? And she said, I'm going to see she told me how her daughter was behaving and whatever, going out and drinking and taking drugs and all this kind of stuff. She said, I'm going to the imam. I said, you're wasting your time. She said, why? I said, your daughter isn't Muslim. What do you mean? She's Khadija. She was born in Tunis. Your daughter is not Muslim. Look at her behavior. She said, what should I do? I said, start by watching Dr. Phil. He knows more